Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Eastside Freedom Library. I'm Peter, co-director here. Clarence White in the back is our associate director. Carla Wheely is going to be Facebook live streaming this. So if you're in the witness protection program or something and you don't want to be seen, you know, make some kind of a sign to Carla. Joanne, you should be up here. Yeah. So, there is a kind of a long development to this, what brings us to tonight. A long discussion that started in the summer about the relationship between the labor movement and social movements, which then led us to plan a series of programs. This is the first, so you're here right on the ground floor. We're going to be going on the third Monday night, is that right? This is the third Monday night. So the third Monday night in December, we will be doing labor and environmentalism. On the third Monday night in January, which is Martin Luther King Day, we will be doing labor and Black Lives Matter, and on throughout the year. Practical questions, bathrooms are downstairs. If you haven't signed the guest book, lightning will strike you, so please sign the guest book, and we will send you, now it's 2 emails a month. It used to be 1, but now there's so much stuff happening, we need to send you, a month. A month. 2 emails a month, 1 at the beginning, 1 in the middle, to let you know what's going on. I do want to say of all the kinds of things that go on here, and want to invite you to suggest things to us that you would like to do here or would like to see happen here, and I am going to call out our fellow workers, Emmett and Liza, who are going to get married here. Yes, we are going to have a wobbly wedding here. Saturday the 15th of December. Look at Emmett blush. So we're very, when we first took over the space 4.5 years ago, all kinds of people gave us all kinds of advice, like maybe you should have a coffee shop, maybe you should do weddings. You know, we said, well, we're about organizing for social power. But I couldn't deny Emmett and Liza that they wanted to have their wedding here, and so we're thrilled, and that's going to be fun. So I want to turn things over to Thiele from Teamsters Local 320, who is facilitating this conversation tonight, and hopefully it will be a conversation that we can all participate in. Claire?
Thank you, Peter. Do you want to sit down? I think that this stool is supposed to be for you. Okay.
It's challenging for the short leg here.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming out. It's a little chilly, so you braved the elements to be in this beautiful space with us tonight. As Peter said, I'm Thiele. I'm the organizer at Teamsters Local 320. We do public employees throughout the state of Minnesota. Our panel today is Fuhrman, the president of AFSCME 2822. We have Joanne Hager, Mason Tender from Laborers 563. Christa Mello, the president of Unite Here Local 17. And last but not least, Kathryn Engdahl, the attorney for the Interfaculty organization at Minsky. So we all know why we're here with the news about the Me Too movement and how it's really shaken, especially Hollywood, and the cultural dynamics around us, how that intersects with organized labor. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off. Allie, would you like to start?
Sure. So my name's Fuhrman. I work at Hennepin County. I'm a clerical worker there. I work in the libraries. I represent about 1,300 workers, mostly women. It's a pretty diverse workforce. I've been in the my union for about 7 years. 2 years ago, I became the president of the local. I'm going to share a couple things, some campaigns we've built around sexual harassment. These were not campaigns we sought to build. I don't think anyone goes out and looks for these things. They kind of come at you. You have no choice but to address them. And then talk a little bit about what internal sexual harassment looks like has looked like in my local. I was trying to think of some larger vision or perspective on what it means and how you build a movement around fighting sexual harassment and discrimination and assault. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. I know what we've seen in our local is solidarity and being vocal. So I'll share a couple things that we experienced. So I became president right after Trump was inaugurated into office. About 2 months later, I got a phone call from one of my chief stewards, and she said, I think you need to talk to a worker, something bad has happened. And I was like, well, okay, bad things happen a lot. I talked to her on the phone, and she said that she had been investigated about going to work on her day off. And I was like, okay. So I met up with her, and it turns out she was called into the office by her supervisor on her day off. She was a young woman of color on probation in a correctional facility. Her supervisor, not her direct supervisor, but supervisor had planted seeds that made her think that her job was contingent on having first a friendly relationship and then a sexual relationship with him. He found out where she lived and would go by her place, and she'd been working for years to get in the county, and anyways, I never learned the full details, but she was asked to come into work on her day off and was sexually assaulted in the workplace. The only reason she came to me was because she was being investigated herself. In a correctional facility, you are not allowed to go into work if you are not scheduled. So somebody had told management 6 months after the fact that she had been in the building. She was investigated by an internal audit committee, which their only job is to investigate workers. So they make about $100,000 a piece. This is over $1 million budget for this body to investigate a department of probably 1,500 people. She told them that she didn't exactly say what happened, but she said she was touched in a way she didn't want to be touched and felt she had no choice but to come in. They referred to her assailant as her boyfriend, and didn't do anything for 7 days before she called us, and we demanded a meeting with HR the next day, and he was put on administrative leave. I brought this back to, I was very new in my position, and I didn't really know what to do, but I went to my membership and I asked this woman, I said, look, I'm not going to use your name, but our members are going to want to know about this, and they're going to want to do something about this. And she was afraid she was going to lose her job. So I went to our membership. People were like, well, let's go on strike tomorrow. I was like, well, if everyone would, that would be great. We're not quite that organized yet. But we called a meeting with the head of the organization. He said he would meet with me personally. I said, I don't want to meet with you personally. I have about 6 of my leaders and women and people of color who want to be in the room. And I also want other presidents at Hennepin County with me because this is real fucked up and I don't want to be there by myself. We get to the meeting and he didn't show up. He sent the director who had overseen the investigation to be there, who denied leaving the perpetrator in the workplace for 8 days after the woman told of her assault. So, and I confronted him directly and I said, you knew, you are the one who oversees every investigation. You are the director and you just told me you oversee personally every investigation. So you knew for 8 days and you didn't do anything. You left him in the workplace. And he said, is there a problem with that? And this person was promoted after this, actually. And management wanted to fire both my worker. Well, at first they just wanted to fire her. They ended up firing the boss. For me, it was a real quick introduction to supervisory abuse, to the way women, particularly entry-level women workers, if this was a professional worker, I'm going to be honest, it would have been handled differently. But we are entry-level workers. This was a worker, a young woman of color, and they wanted to discipline her. So we didn't build a campaign after that. We got him out. We had to fight to get her another job in another location, but that was kind of our first introduction of this is the lengths that management will go to protect their own. And I'm not saying, it's interesting as, you just tell me when to stop talking.
You're okay.
There's different cultures in different areas, right? So like as a clerical local, we represent workers in corrections, in the libraries, in health and human services, your DMV. And each department has a different culture around how they deal with discrimination and sexual harassment. So in corrections, it's just very blatant, right? And in some ways, it's easier to fight it because it's right in your face, right? And it's so easy. They say the stupidest shit, and they, like our workers are kind of smart and often will record them, and it's like right there. But in the libraries, it's so insidious, and they say the words, they know the language of equity and fighting oppression, and but when it comes to firing workers of color, when it comes to protecting women or people or queer people, it's not there. We had a situation in the libraries of sexual harassment of a supervisor, a male supervisor, would walk up to workers with his zipper down and thrust his genitals in women's faces when they were sitting at their computers. They came forward about this. They moved him to another library. He finally got fired recently, but and people were afraid. This is also the thing too, is people weren't. It took folks a long time to step forward and say something, and it's hard too because most women have experienced some kind of sexual assault or harassment, and it's the leadership in our local has really struggled. How it's traumatic and it's re-stimulating when your people are going through it, and then, but it's a good rallying point for people to come together in that solidarity, and it really did bring us, especially that first round, it brought our new people really close together, and it also showed our membership that we will not tolerate the bullshit. So I think that's what we're trying to do, is build a culture where, and we're starting to see it develop, and it takes a long time because there's a lot of trust to be rebuilt with our members, right? For a long time, we were no better than the boss, and when I would go in, or our stewards would go into workplaces and try to talk to people about things, they didn't want to talk to us because they thought we would just turn around and tell management or sell them out. But we're starting to see that that's shifting, and we are starting to see people speak up in their staff meetings, or when they see the sexual harassment of a coworker, like Joanne, like that's not okay. You know, and talking amongst themselves, trying to organize amongst themselves. And the last piece I'll just say is we've also had internal sexual harassment and have struggled to figure out how to deal with that. We just attended a labor education services training at the U of M last week and decided to create a committee to develop a process to take complaints and allegations of sexual assault and harassment within our union. We're not sure if we'll do that for member to member, but definitely people who are active in the local. And some kind of oath that, you know, we are an organization that stands behind women, that stands behind queer people, people of color. We will not tolerate any form of discrimination or any acts of intimidation, something like that. And then a way that also, because it's not the boss, we don't want the, you know, there's some hope that we can work with folks and through struggle can help people undo the misogynistic bullshit they were taught, you know? Like a lot of our people are working class people. They don't have the language or haven't had the learning or what I've been calling their shit ever, you know? And sometimes that's just what they need. And sometimes they'll, people will continue that kind of behavior and not change, but we're hoping that we can create a culture in our local where people are given a chance, and if they blow it, then they blow it. But it's not quite like the boss, so we're trying to figure out what that looks like.
Excellent. Joanne?
Yeah, I guess I'll try and speak about on the job as a tradeswoman in the building trades, and then also what I was thinking about with Me Too and unions pertaining to building trade unions. See friends out here. First of all, I'm really glad that there are tradeswomen in the crowd, and I don't know how many of you know, but I'll explain it this way. Every Friday I come home and my husband says, so have you been invited back? Because I don't know if I'm going to be working tomorrow because the phone could ring tonight, and so I might not have a job tomorrow. And there really has to be no real given reason why I'm not invited back. You see? There's a huge problem there when we have a system of employment and lack of employment law to protect the workers in the building and construction trades unions. There's a real problem. So almost everything she said,
A million times more.
no, almost everything she said doesn't apply to the building trades. When you learn about grievance handling, it doesn't apply to the building trades. It's different. It's different, and I think that's what my hope is that as union members we can talk about how can we support a system as union brothers and sisters that really doesn't support the workers themselves in the given system that exists today. You know, you would think I'm under a collective bargaining agreement, I'm not at will. But in all intents and purposes, I am an at-will employee. If I don't know if I have a job tomorrow or next week, if I can be laid off for no reason or a reason or any reason, that isn't very reassuring. It also doesn't bode well with saying what's on your mind when you go to work. Talking back to the boss. Declaring, you know, I'm not going to stand for this. Or, you know, it doesn't bode well with any of that, right? So the building trades has particular issues regarding a lot of things. And that's why historically it's been a place where a lot of discrimination has happened. Unfortunately, I can't just say historically because I can say presently. So I just want to kind of talk about the huge difference between building and construction trades and the other 75% of the unions out there. So our only hope is to change construction culture. That's our only hope. and to develop more critical mass of women, develop more critical mass of healthy workers, not toxic workers, and to, I believe, as union members, to talk about workers' rights.
Can I just
In
ask,
our
when you say healthy workers, what do you mean as opposed to toxic workers?
Well, thank you for the question. So Harvard University did an awesome study on toxic workers. I would encourage everybody to read this, and I would love it if all human resources individuals would read it. And I think if you care about the healthiness of an organization, a job site, a workplace, you can gain a lot of wisdom from reading it. Some toxic workers are the most productive workers out there. And I can tell you that some toxic workers in the construction trades, you just need one or two to really ruin everything. Especially in my world, if they carry a radio on them. You know, if they are in some line of authority, if they have some power and influence over the boss, and they typically do because they are typically very good workers. You know, they are reliable to do as they are asked to do, and they have a lot of power and control because they have this association with the foreman or the owners of the companies. But those toxic workers make it life miserable for the rest of the people. So you only need one or two. I can think of a job that I worked on with many people, and there was just one or two. But I say it was a very uncomfortable place to work. And I finally told my boss, I said, you know, this radio is overrated. I said, you know, I think I would really love to be in a position where I didn't have to use the radio. Because when I took the radio off, or you know, took it off at lunch or whatever, that's the abuse off button. You know? So just talking a little bit how different the building and construction trades world is. And then if we had more women, as we are really hoping and trying to get more women into our industry, developing critical mass of women and healthier workers and people who like women or don't mind working with women, can lead to a healthier work site as well. But until we resolve, until we kind of get over that hurdle about, do I have a job tomorrow? If I speak my mind, am I jeopardizing my paycheck? Am I jeopardizing my future? To say nothing about every day we're trying to work ourselves out of a job by working on a construction job. Because, you know, we're trying to finish the building, right? And then we don't know if we have an assignment after that. So just wanted to say that. But then I also wanted to talk about unions and what I said before. You know, collective bargaining agreements and unions were founded on workers' rights and workplace, what am I trying to say? Conditions, working conditions. Well, what are my working conditions if I really don't feel like I don't know if I have a job tomorrow? Does somebody have my back? Right now, across the country, we have 3% women in the building trades who touch tools, who work with tools. 40 years ago, we had 3% women touching tools. So we haven't done enough to change construction culture. And this is where I think Me Too and the union movement, unions has a place, has a real important role in stating how discrimination has been rampant in our industry. And we as union leaders, let's own it. Let's do something about it. And let's talk to our union members about how we can assist them in their work life so that they don't feel like they have no voice or they have no fight because they need to provide for their families, you know. you know, like I said, grievances are way different. In many ways, the building and construction trades have a stronger relationship with contractors than they do with their own workers. I mean, really, right?
I mean, it's true.
You know, and we need to change that. You know, union member engagement is extremely important. It's very important in building and construction trades. But we need to, so we need to kind of let's remind ourselves why we all want that coveted union job. Union jobs are about, you know, the foundation of them are about workers' rights, civil rights, women's rights, and repeat, right? That should be central to how we walk as union members, how we walk as union leadership. And so let this not be another reason to have a lost opportunity in being engaged with our members. This Me Too movement not be another lost opportunity. So we have a lot to talk about as far as workers' rights in building and construction trades. So I would encourage us to I really love talking to a pro-union crowd and to illustrate how building and construction trades industry is different and how workers and unions are different. Thank you for that opportunity.
Excellent.
What trade?
I'm a labor with Local 563.
Christa? Well, I with Unite here, Local 17, which is the hospitality union. So, you know, we of course have supervisor to worker harassment. We have member to member harassment. But one of the biggest things in our industry is customers or guests. One of the biggest things that kind of sparked Unite here to get most involved in the anti-harassment stuff is, you know, some of the high-profile situations that had happened, like in New York, and there was others in other cities. But it really made the hospitality industry aware of what is going on, and made Unite here so vocal in it. So a lot of our other locals in other cities, it started in New York, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, a lot of the different large cities that have had situations of harassment, especially to the guest room attendants. They started a movement called hands off, hands on, which I don't often say because I end up saying, you know, hands on, pants off, and that's kind of like the anti of what we're trying to go at. But really, the biggest thing around that is, you know, in guest rooms and the conduct that guests often engage in the guest rooms for the room attendants. And so when we started doing, the surveys around, it was around December, January of last year, or of this year, I guess December 2017, January of 2018. We started doing the surveys, and we were just surveying our members and the guest room attendants primarily, and just saying, you know, have you ever experienced sexual harassment? And, you know, we just gave the surveys and said, here, fill this out. And one of the things that we realized is that it's not a situation where we can just hand them a survey and expect a worker to fill it out and give us honest answers coming back. Because for one, it's an uncomfortable situation. They don't want to talk about it. It's embarrassing for them. Culturally, the different cultures react differently to it. Some, it's such a negative thing that they're the ones to blame, or they feel they're the ones that have asked for that behavior. And some of them just are so immune to it that they don't even really realize that it can be considered harassment. So we then went and actually sat down with members and with the survey, and the survey asks things like, has a guest remembered coming out the door without clothes on? You know, has a guest ever, you know, asked you out on dates? Has a guest ever propositioned you? That kind of stuff. And it was stuff that especially the room attendants from different cultures didn't even realize was a problem. They were just like, oh yeah, they do that all the time. It's like, well, that is a problem, you know. If you're going into a guest room and the guest is in there without any clothes on, that's an issue. But it's an issue that management didn't necessarily take serious. So the workers didn't know that it was a problem. They didn't know that they shouldn't be exposed to something like that. And management didn't take care of it because this is people that are giving them money. They're paying for the room. So, you know, they're less likely to say anything to the guest. And so some of the severe cases of harassment and assault made it really apparent that something needed to be done. When a room attendant is going into a guest room, they're vulnerable. Depending on the different locations, some of them actually close themselves off in the room with the guest. And you know, if it's just a normal guest, that's fine, but if it's somebody that means them harm, they have no way of escaping. So they're closed into a room with somebody that can do them harm. So one of the things that our international and us as a local are working on is pushing every hotel to implement panic buttons on every housekeeper, so that when the housekeeper is going into the guest rooms, they have direct access to the front desk and to security. So if I'm a housekeeper, I go into a room, the guest is doing something that does not make me feel comfortable, I can then contact security. It is something that we are in alignment of cities doing. So for us, you know, most of the large hotel corporations are already doing it in other cities. So they've just said, yeah, we'll do it in these. But some of the smaller ones, because it's costly to put these panic buttons in every room, some of the smaller hotels we're pushing it in the 2019 contract negotiations to actually get the language in the contract. Along with that, we're also working on legislation to require hotel management, or you know, the hospitality industry management, to actually hold guests accountable for it. Because where we have guests, or we have the room attendants who have their own harassment, we also have servers and bartenders who, you know, servers, somebody will grab their butt, or somebody will make a comment about the clothes that they're wearing, or somebody will proposition them and ask for free drinks, and you know, or and a lot of the times management doesn't want to cut them out, doesn't want to kick them out. So you get a drunk person in the hotel lobby, they're paying lots of money for a hotel room, the management doesn't want to kick them out. That's bad press for them. So they'll allow that behavior. And the management will just be like, it's okay, don't worry about it, it's all right. We had one situation where a server was actually held up against the wall and groped by a guest. And when she brought it to the management actually bought the guest a drink instead of kicking them out and cutting them off. Because, you know, somebody who had a large amount of money, they were repeat guests at the hotel, so they just didn't want to actually take care of it. So we're working on legislation that would hold management accountable for holding the guest accountable. And that would be not only in our union properties, but also in the non-union properties, which is why we feel so strongly to do it in legislation. Because we can do contract language, but that just holds our management in our union properties accountable. But if it's actual legislation, then it's in all of them. So. It's just something that, you know, a lot of people, especially culturally, it's not an easy thing for them to admit that has ever happened or address. So, you know, we're working really hard to make sure that our members know that it's not their fault, they're not the ones to blame, it's not something that they should be embarrassed about. The people that are acting that way should be the ones that are embarrassed by it. So.
Excellent. Kathryn?
Thanks. I'm Kathryn Engdahl, and I'm currently an attorney. I've been for a long time, but I started out as a machinist, and I just want to say that my first job as a machinist, I got fired for trying to organize a union. My second job as a machinist, my supervisor who trained me in left. I suddenly got put on totally unskilled work, and so when I went to complain about that, and because I trained in a guy, of course, and to do the skilled work, and when I went to complain to the owner, I got fired. My last job as a machinist, before I finally decided to go to law school, I experienced gender harassment and sexual harassment. So, I come by this from a lot of personal experience. And I went to law school to represent unions, to become a lawyer to represent unions and individual employees, which is what I've been doing since 1985. And in doing that, it's interesting. So I also experienced sexual harassment by, guess what, union folks. I remember, I just looked at I have a little trophy on my shelf from a golf tournament, 1992. That was a building trades golf tournament where I literally, somebody came up behind me to show, the women here know the drill. Someone is going to show me how to cut, right? So he puts his arms around me and, of course, behaved inappropriately, and all the men around were laughing. So did I complain to my employer? Here I was, a union and, civil rights lawyer. Did I make a complaint? No. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. That is how this works. You internalize it. You stuff it down, right? There's a lot of women here nodding. And, I never reported it. I couldn't tell you who it was who did it, because it was just, a nameless, faceless male in a group of nameless, faceless men at this point in time in my life. But I will tell you that I have had the privilege, on the other hand, of being hired by the local IBEW Local 292 Joint Apprenticeship. I see a smile there. I recognize you. Hi. Joint Apprenticeship Training Committee. And back in, I think it was not too long after 1992, I started doing trainings for apprentices that is called harassment training. And it is not just about sexual harassment, but that was really where it started. But it's also about racial harassment. It's grown into LGBTQ harassment. And that program has had a solid commitment for all these years to train not only all second-year apprentices, but all fifth-year apprentices get a second kind of a dose before they go out the door. And I can tell you that, we were talking about culture. I think that that's an opportunity for affecting culture. And I will say that, and then there was also discussion about, well, you have to have a more diverse workplace. You have to have women working in the workplace in order to build, to build relationships, to build respect. And, it's a price that many of us dearly pay for being the only woman on a job or in the building trades, for sure. But I'll also tell you that back in the 90s, when I started doing the training, it was all white men. And it was extremely hostile. I used to, joke about putting on a flak jacket when I went in to teach because of the hostility. And I provoked, because my approach to training is that I don't want people just sitting muttering under their breaths in the back row and then leaving and nothing changes. I want to confront the ugliest and the worst and really engage. And so it was rough for a long time, but then eventually I would get one guy in the room who I considered an ally, who was, somehow was some kind of woke, right? And he would engage with me, and then between the two of us, we could talk to them. Well, So it has evolved where the apprentices are much more, the classes are more diverse racially and gender and in terms of LGBTQ, gender and race. Certainly they still have a long ways to go. They're not, I mean, I am not kidding myself to think that there's going to, you know, there's been significant change, but I will say that increasingly there is like more gotten to the point where it's like 1 or 2 or 3 people in the class of 20 who are having a hard time with the concept of not harassing, not being toxic. But the other thing that I think is really, really important, there's been a lot of work on what is effective in terms of training and what's ineffective. And what I've seen that is most effective in terms of when I can really feel that there might be some culture, a little bit of a culture shift in a class, and these are classes that are together for a whole year, so these are relationships amongst apprentices. When I see a culture, when I see something that is when they are talking to each other. I was just in a class a couple of weeks ago where we started talking about white privilege, and you know, a really resentful white apprentice talking about his resentments, and 2 African American apprentices basically engaging with each other, and eventually seeing that there was some kind of understanding that happened, and some kind of communication that happened between peers that I think is a step. It's not a panacea by any stretch, but I think that is an important process that needs to go on in terms of people really talking to each other. The other thing that I think is really important is for workers to understand the power that they have. Every single one. You don't have to be, all you have to be is a coworker. And we talk about this, you know, one of the most powerful things you can do is if you see somebody being harassed is to say, I saw that. That's not, are you okay? That's not okay. What can, you know, being familiar with the complaint procedure, usually there is one, because that's what employers do, right? But, you know, and being willing to back that person is huge, because as we all know, when you were nodding, when you get harassed, it's like, oh, you know, I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. I want to just hide. You know, if somebody had come up to me, if any one of those people in that situation had come up to me and said, that was not okay, that would have really made me feel a lot more empowered and a lot less diminished. The other thing is the power that workers have to confront other workers, the bystanders. Hey, knock it off. I don't want to hear that joke. And I'll tell you, if it's a white guy telling a white guy they don't want to hear a racist joke, it's flabbergasting to the guy who just told it. And the other thing is to look at, well, then what happens? Well, usually what I hear is that they stopped. You know, so it's really, really hard, and I totally get what you're saying about the trades. It's really rough. And I have a daughter who's working in the electrical trades for 292, and you know, I hear about it all the time, racial and gender harassment. It is, you know, it is real. And it is tough. And one of the things that one of these African American apprentices said just last week, you know, when I go in and somebody starts following me around, like they're suspicious of me on the job, like, what's this black guy doing here? And I'm there legitimately to do my job. That is, he said, that really bothers me. And then it's cumulative. And that's the other thing, is that it doesn't have to be a sexual assault. It can just be these microaggressions, accumulation of diminishment and inappropriate behavior that makes you feel like the other, like the outsider, that is extremely stressful and affects safety. So there's a lot of work to be done. I'm privileged to say that I'm trying really hard to work on that on behalf of at least one of the unions. And the other thing I'll add before I stop is I think that it's absolutely critical that the leadership, that and in this case it's the JATC, that they put their money where their mouth is, that they actually take a stand, that when somebody comes to them with a complaint, they don't brush it off, they don't sweep it under the rug, they follow through. And what I've tried to do is that when I get stories from apprentices, is I go and meet with them and I say, here's what's going on, what are you going to do about it? So that's the other piece that's absolutely critical, because if you can't tell somebody to go to this person or that person or the union if they don't have the confidence that they're going to have their back. So that's it.
Excellent. Well, before we open it up for audience questions, I have a question for the panel. I'd like to circle back to something Christa mentioned that I think all of our panelists kind of touched on here. The Me Too movement has been largely sort of adopted by Hollywood, and with that comes some prestige. But it's been accused lately of leaving behind the most vulnerable workers, poor women, and for that matter, poor men, because men can also be harassed at work. So what does our panel think that we as a labor movement in this struggle can do to continue to tie our struggle in with the struggle of our non-unionized brothers and sisters that are even more vulnerable to these attacks? Christa mentioned legislation is being pushed. Anyone who wants to start? So, our non-unionized brothers and sisters don't have anyone to rely on, and I think it's so important for us as a labor movement to continue to fight for the betterment of all workers.
Yeah. Well, it's a safety issue. You know, as building and construction trades unions, we talk about safety all the time. We have OSHA 40 or OSHA 30 or whatever. You have to take your safety seriously. If the unions speak of it as a safety issue as well as discrimination, because if you don't feel someone has your back, you don't feel they have your back as far as when it's as a safety concern. So that would be number one, and then also to let's just be very frank and clear about what exists, what has exists, and why it's so necessary to change. Why it's so necessary to change as unions, because we are all about workers' rights. We are all about civil rights. We are all about women's rights. And to go back to the roots of what unions were formed on. What does our union leadership look like? Does it reflect our membership? That's just so basic. But the building and construction trades have a long way to go with just on that alone. There's a lot of power and control, and relinquishing that power and control is very challenging for a lot of people. I'm a member of LIUNA, and our slogan is "Feel the Power." The only time I feel power is when I go into the restroom and it says "Feel the power" when you put your hands underneath that blower. I feel the power.
Yeah.
So in order to feel the power, you need to share the power. And we need to share the power with our members. We need to get back to what union membership is all about. And I think we're so far from that, unfortunately. So, but safety issue. And also, before I didn't speak about anything, right? I didn't speak about harassment in the trades. That was very intentional. Because our compelling stories are told all the time. You've heard them, everybody knows about it, right? We're sick and tired of telling our compelling stories. Because if we thought about it, we could probably come up with a compelling story pretty much every day. So we need to change construction culture. We need strong union leadership to stand up and declare that we need to have a huge change in what's going on in our workplace. And we need to look in-house first. We need to look at the JATCs. We need to look at our union meetings. Union meetings can even be a terrible place. But the good thing is we are a union family. And we have a union history that's rich in all these things, of ways to fix this, of respecting one another as union brothers and sisters, and being in solidarity with one another as union brothers and sisters. We need to go back to that, and that will help us. All these things, they don't cost any money.
Right.
It doesn't. It doesn't cost any money to change construction culture. It takes a lot of commitment, and it takes time.
Well, the construction trades in particular, so much depends on the larger projects that are public funded. Now, those public funded projects, sometimes your best allies are outside the union, like in the city council. Certainly, if you get public funding for an apartment building, a stadium, maybe, you gotta have bonding, you gotta have lots of criteria. Maybe you need to have every 60 days you have someone come in to tell the folks who went through JATC 20 years ago.
Well, I've taught sexual harassment courses as well at the training center. I was an instructor for a year at the training center. It doesn't move the needle as much as leadership.
What I've noticed is there's lots of little fiefdoms out there. Places with people that have been to the JATC for 20 years, where they rule as little kings, and there aren't many ways to break into those. Those folks don't necessarily go to meetings, but they go to their jobs.
I like to talk about solutions though, and one of the things is that the building trades contractors want to please their owners. In the case of MnDOT is the owner, right? The contractors want to please the owners so that they can get renewed contracts or get additional contracts, be seen in a positive light. And then subcontractors want to please the general contractor. So we just need to attack it from all ends. The unions have to step up and admit there's a problem in our industry. And then the owners need to, if you're an owner and you talk about diversity and inclusion and you really feel it's at the core of the mission statement of your organization, you need to make sure that it exists also in any building efforts that are going on, or remodeling efforts, or that it exists with people that you're bringing in to do work. You can't, it's not a different entity. So that message has to bring clear. So I think, I like to tell this story, and it's not to be super critical, it's just to point out something. I worked at the Viking Stadium, and it was a wonderful project as far as bringing a diverse workforce to Minneapolis and on such a large project. But was my experience any different as a worker? And that's what we have to get to. We have to change the workers' experience so that they feel that this is a friendly, conducive, safe place for them to work and be respected, and to, and that just doesn't exist. If I went through 3 orientation meetings at the Viking Stadium and never once heard about the owner's commitment to diversity on this project, or the owner's commitment to making sure that all people were treated with respect who walk through these doors to work on this project, I would have thought, well, maybe something is a little different here. But we don't get that messaging as workers. So there's a lot to do. There's, unions have stepped up, and unions have, like the iron workers, they've adopted, I'm not a huge fan, but I mean, it's a start. But they've started a plan called Be That One Guy. Be that one guy. I'd like to say be that one individual. Own your zone. Make sure that, if you see anything, of course, you make a step to improve it. Other areas have incorporated the green dot movement on construction efforts, or other things like that. So there are examples of ways to address sexual harassment in particular, but we need to address the construction culture.
Sure. Kathryn, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to give something that's happening I work right now in-house at the Interfaculty organization, which represents the professors at the 7 state universities in Minsk. And we've really confronted that whole issue very intensely, partly because of the attack on public sector unions legally. But in general, trying to make a cultural shift of the leadership so that our leadership is actually more diverse. And that's very hard. You were talking about fiefdoms, it's very hard when you have established leadership. How do you work to make that change? And what we're finding is from the ground, from the grassroots up. And it started with a Faculty of Color caucus, where statewide Faculty of Color got together, this is about 2 years ago. And it has evolved to the point where I'm very happy and proud to say that last spring, our delegate assembly adopted a it's a step in the right direction, which is a shift to where caucuses, that would be the Women's Caucus, the Faculty of Color Caucus, and the LGBTQ caucuses they form on each campus, each of the 7 campuses. You don't have to be a member of the union to be in the caucus, but obviously you identify with that group. They're not controlled in any way or connected in any way with the existing established leadership. And then each caucus gets to select a representative to this. There's a statewide committee and also a representative to the local leadership body, the governing body. So that those groups get to choose their own leader, their own representatives, as opposed to going through kind of a broader, hierarchical, general popularity contest, which we found is not representative. And what we're finding is that it is increasing the engagement of members who've been marginalized, and that it's a step. None of this is going to happen overnight, and as you can only imagine, people who are entrenched do not let go easily. So it's a process, but I think that's I think it can be a model for a lot of unions to look at how do you where does the leadership come from that can bring about change.
Any other panelists?
Well, I would just say, like I had touched on before, with the legislation, it would hold other non-union places accountable. We like to always think that we're kind of the leaders in the industry, and what we negotiate in our CBAs, what we push for, kind of leads in the non-union as well, because they know eventually, unless they want us to come in and organize them, they're going to have to do something similar to that, right? So they bring their wages up to kind of what our wages are. They bring our, the panic button thing. Once all the union hotels are equipped with that, of course, the non-union hotels will be as well, because they don't want to be the evil employers that don't care about worker safety. So we know that it's not just our union places, it's not just our union members that are affected by it, but also in the community. And so that helps because we can then work with community groups that also have the same goal in mind. And we can bring them into the fold and bring them a part of, whether it's our organizing campaigns or whether it's contract negotiations where we're fighting for that language. Those other community groups then have the ability to join in with us because we have a common goal. And then just to touch on, I think as you had said, the union leadership I would just encourage people to look at your union leadership and see how the diversity of your union leadership can potentially change. Because if it's something within your own local and the harassment or discrimination is a key thing within your local, is your union leadership diverse enough to actually think that that's an issue? If you have a group of union leadership that has never once experienced harassment might not be their goal. Like, they might not even realize that it needs to be a goal because they've never experienced that themselves. And the same with, discrimination. If it's a union leadership that has never once had to deal with discrimination, they don't know that it's necessarily a thing that needs to be addressed. I think that it's something that's all the unions are kind of moving towards that, diversity within the union leadership. But I would just encourage everybody to, within your own unions or within your own groups.
Did you say all of them?
Not all. Not all. But, I think that the leadership needs to change in order for the unions to continue to stay relevant to these issues.
Yes, hashtag not all union leaders. Hear your opinion to add before you open it up?
No.
All right, I saw some hands start here.
Yes, I also think another group are people with disabilities who are often marginalized by, often they're not in unions, and even if they are, they're often vulnerable to sexual harassment, especially women, by not just co-workers, but by supervisors. And they need, somebody to have their back.
Excellent.
And who knows, there are also people with disabilities who could probably do some good work in the trades as well. In anything.
Great points. Any questions? I saw you.
My name is Katie. I'm a carpenter out of Local 322. Just a couple of things I wanted to talk about, bouncing off Joanne, of course, and then a question for the panel. So the Viking Stadium is a perfect example of what the law does for minorities in construction trades. 30% of the people that worked on that field, on that stadium, needed to be a minority. 20% needed to be female. So the perfect, well, actually, I think it was 6% needed to be female, but Mortensen upped it to 20%. So, and Mortensen is a completely different topic that we don't need to talk about tonight. So my working group was Jira, African American, me, and Jesse. And Jesse was our lead. So we were the perfect, in the eyes of Mortensen, we were the perfect working trio at the Viking Stadium. With that being said, people approached us like, well, these two are here because they have to be here. I have to be here. Well, let me tell you, I'm a fucking good carpenter. My finished product looks just like this white boy's finished product does. And I will proudly say that. So my question, bouncing off of everybody, and people in the room can obviously participate. We always talk about more training, more training, more training. We need to train the business agents, we need to train the people in the field. And fucking bullshit. When they're whipping out their penis on the job site, they know that's wrong. I don't need more training for this guy to know that him showing me his penis is wrong. I want to go back to what Joanne said, where we have more people standing up and saying, okay, what you're doing is disgusting, cut it out. So when we approach our union as carpenters, and keep in mind that the carpenters have a really solid group of females called the Sisters in the Brotherhood. We meet once a month. About 20 to 30 of us show up every month. And when you're talking about 100 carpenters that are females in the Twin Cities, 30% show up. That's amazing. But when we tell our leadership, hey, this is going on, and their response back to us is, oh, we'll just do more training. I want to take your train and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. I'm not trying to be rude, but I want to go, you know, your program you talked about where you're meeting with apprenticeships at the IBEW, second year, fifth year, we do a 4-year apprenticeship in the carpenters. I mean, how would you respond to what I just said? Like,
Well, I agree. I think that there's training and there's training.
right.
That's what, and I totally agree that in fact, someone from the EEOC last week, the chair of the EEOC nationally was at a conference that I was at and said, there's a cottage industry of training and most of it is not worth it at all. It's like not worth anything. But there is some that is worthwhile. And that's the key, is to figure out, and that's why I'm trying to say is that really it's about, I mean, I totally agree with you. What you need is somebody who knows to stand up to say, that's, cut it out, knock it off. That's not acceptable. And that's my goal for being there, is to let these guys, and it's guys, let them know that they need to say something and have them talk about when have you and what happened. Because that's what you want to do, is to create that kind of culture where you are sticking up for each other. And I think that's absolutely critical. And it's, is it going to stick for everybody? I would like to hope that, but I know that that's not true.
Right.
And I know that there are going to be times where there's going to be a light bulb that turns on for somebody, like when somebody steps up and says, this happened to me. And it's somebody who they know in their class, and who matters to them. And then maybe next time, when they see it, they'll say something. No guarantees, and largely, it has to do with that system in the construction trades of, there's just going to be a sudden reduction in force. And so there is a lot of risk in sticking your neck out, no doubt about it. But so I'm always happy to hear when people have, men and women. But you're absolutely right to say, if somebody says training to me, 9 times out of 10 I'm going to go, never mind, because I know what they're talking about. God forbid it's. If it's Minsky, it's online, which is completely worthless, But I mean, it's got to be face-to-face, it's got to matter, it's got to engage. Otherwise, it's not worth it. But what the goal is exactly what you're talking about. Somebody's saying, that's not okay. We're not going to allow that in this place. It's a safety issue, damn it. It is distracting everybody from what they need to be doing. So knock it off, and one person says that, and then other people, they see that. I mean, it's got to happen. And thank you for saying that, because I think you're absolutely right.
Does anyone have anything to add?
I would just say, one of the things that we do, because we're kind of the opposite of the trades, because we have primarily women and primarily people of color, but even in that situation, like, if management says, hey, I'm going to do a harassment training, and that really just means crap to the workers. It's just them sitting in a room and hearing about how, if this happens, come and see us, Well, then they go and see the manager, if they feel comfortable doing so. They go and see the manager and nothing changes, nothing happens, nothing's done. Well, that, pretty much eliminates any training. You know, they could go through the same training year after year after year after year, but the management told them by not doing anything in the very beginning that it wasn't a big deal for them, you know, and they might say something and, you know, spout some good stuff because that's what their corporate is telling them to say so that they don't get sued by somebody in the future. But it really doesn't mean anything. So for us, we push more to not have trainings, but organize. You know, so if we find out something's happening to one person, we then organize 20 more to go with them to management and say, this is not okay. It might not happen to me, but it's not okay for it to happen to anybody. It's not okay for it to happen to this person I want to meet or to that person or to that person. You know, so we always encourage organizing rather than training.
Anyone else? Or we keep that?
Well, I guess I just keep thinking about, like, the boss wants all these divisions, right? Like, the boss is never gonna do anything to actually end racism or misogyny or sexism. Like, that's to their benefit. Like, if we're all fighting each other, they win. So we can never think that they're never really gonna care about diversity, right? It's legally they have to put on these trainings, and it's a trend, but yeah, I think we've seen kind of a shift with our people that you know, there was kind of an racist old guard that a lot of people walked away when new leadership came in, but the folks who stuck around, it didn't take long. We started building a fighting union, right? Like, not collaborating with the boss, which shook things up a lot. And we were fighting, and through those fights, people saw that their self-interest is tied to the interests of their black coworker, or their female coworker, or their Muslim coworker, and that started to build solidarity. And then you have to follow it up with, it's not just that self-interest, it's like a recognition of the morality and the humanity of other people. And it only happens through struggle. I mean, like, the training is good to reinforce, you know, new ideas, but it's without that struggle and fighting the boss, like, it doesn't happen. You don't build relationships, you don't build those ties unless you have an enemy, and we have an enemy. Right? Like, seriously, they are the enemy, and we can't be confused. I won't speak for the trades. That sounds like some crazy shit, but you know, like, and it's confusing to me when you don't have a permanent boss. Like, that's really hard, and you don't know if you're gonna come back on the job the next day. And that, you know, that gets the question of, if we really want to build a fight, it needs to be the trades and the clerical workers and the hotel workers, and we all go out together.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm really glad I made you talk. Em, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I am not in the trades, but I do want to lift up, I know a lot of women who are in the trades, and I hear over and over and over again, it's like screaming into the void, like, please notice that this is happening. And when my friends who approach their supervisors and report something, their supervisors laugh it off, their union member or their union leadership laugh it off, like, kind of paint them as a problem and put them in the corner.
Do you really want to go there?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's what, you
Yeah.
really want to go there? You really,
Yeah, you're
is
told
it worth,
just don't
is
make
it worth saying something, you know, insinuating that there's a major problem? There's
Yeah.
a major problem in employment law in the building and construction trades.
Yeah.
There just is.
The question I had, because I think it's something as women we all experience in a lot of different ways and from a lot of different people, but I just hear over and over again from our sisters in the trades, like, this is an issue that no one has a pulse on, that no one's stepping up for. And I think Christa brought up a good point. There are things we can do in the public sector outside of unions that is just good for everyone. And trainings are bullshit, and sometimes when we pass laws that are meant for good, they're used as tools against us, like what you said with, well, now I'm a token, so I have to be here, and it's not even about my worth. So my question, what can we do as a movement, as non-union, union, trades, non-trades, whatever, how can we all build towards the same goal together? And what does that look like?
I'd go back to what I firmly believe. I waited 47 years before I became part of a high-wage union, got my first high-wage union job at the age of 47. I knew that if I just got a union job, I would be so much happier, because I know what unions are about. I'm 58 right now. I know what unions are about. I know that those would be the best jobs, because unions are about what I am about. Let's just get back to the roots of what our unions are about. And let's have cross-union solidarity, let's have cross-industry solidarity, and let's be proud that we're one of the top union states in America.
Yeah.
Let's try and make it even higher.
Yeah.
And let's build the solidarity among all of us to say to the our state, for example, to say to our state, there is something different about the union experience. There is something different between union and non-union. And that's why I just think we really need to go back to our roots about what a collective bargaining agreement is all about. And to have way more workplace conditions in our collective bargaining agreements. And I can't wait for you to talk.
I wasn't trying to cut you off.
No, and I want to hear you.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to observe, so I'm an electrician apprentice, so I spend a lot of time thinking about this and how to fix this problem, because I deal with this problem every day. And like going back to the issue of trainings and how like a lot of times they're bullshit, like it's true. There's a way for them not to be. And I think the way for them not to be, so, and when I say trainings, I'm actually talking about sort of the overall umbrella of trainings, all the policies that go with it. The enforcement of those policies ultimately has to have teeth, right? I was at a conference in Seattle a few weeks ago, and this woman was talking about this program they have out there, which is basically sort of, there's two customers, Sound Transit, the Transit Authority, and the City of Seattle, who actually like care about getting rid of like harassment and discrimination on their job sites. And so they have this whole training they make everybody go through that's like a real legit training that is based very clearly in a full understanding of exactly how that stuff happens on the job site, which is key. And then there's real consequences. So if people like violate the policy, then they're off the job. So that solves the problem, because that person can't harm another person again, and it also sends a message to everybody else, right? So you gotta have those real consequences, whether it's for coworkers, whether it's for customers, like you were talking about, Christa, like that's gotta be there. But the other piece of it is like what I'm talking about with this training, like really having this full understanding of how it operates, and how this gets back to the idea that we need to go back to our union roots, is that like a lot of times these trainings and policies try to divorce the thing from the power relationships that are intrinsic to this problem, and try to pretend that those power relationships are not there and not the absolute root of the problem, because that's what it is, right? So what you end up with is maybe like a bullshit video that tries to illustrate sexual harassment by having a woman sexually harass a man. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that that can never happen, because there's always those tiny few corner cases in the world where that happens. But we know, everybody in this room knows that almost never happens, and it's almost always the other way around, right? So a video like that just makes a joke of the whole thing by ignoring, like, you know, the power dynamic that's going on and the gender dynamic that's going on. So like that's just one example, but I think that like in solving this problem, we have to like look at it in that way and be really honest about the power aspect of it.
Excellent. We had a question right here, sir.
Yes, I happen to notice that you're all female. I'm wondering, do you have brothers that are waving the pennant for you guys, standing up for the rights of women in the workforce?
Excellent question.
They're not all bad guys, I understand.
Do we have brothers that are standing up in our workforce for us? Christa?
I'm gonna say we definitely do in ours. You know, I think that our industry is a little bit more out front and a little bit leading the charge in that, which, you know, I'm proud of, and, you know, I can say, you know, to kind of to answer your question too, of, you know, what can we do? I think that one of the things that we need to do is, you know, all be on the same page, you know. So often unions fight their own battles in different ways, but if, you know, if we get together and fight together, we can be much stronger, you know, because us who are out front and, you know, are forcing change on our employers that way, you know, we can then be somehow, I don't know how, but somehow beneficial to some of the other unions that maybe are not out front so much. But in our industry, a lot of it, you know, it's definitely, the men are definitely in support of the women. It is not something where, you know, every man is harassing every woman, you know. They definitely have that strength, and in our leadership, you know, the men in our leadership definitely support the women in our membership and say, you know, this is an important issue. This is something that shouldn't happen. This is something that is a top priority and a key issue that needs to be addressed. You know, and all of them have, you know, daughters or mothers or sisters or, you know, anything that, you know, they can recognize that, you know, this could be any one of them.
And I would answer that question by going back to employment law in the building and construction trades. Are my concerns enough for this guy to stick his neck out? He may not be invited back the next day too. Do you know what I'm saying? So but if there's pressure put on the subcontractor by the owner, or if there's pressure put on the general contractor by the owner, and saying that there will be repercussions if, you know, if you don't push this as our number, you know, as a very important goal of ours is that all workers are treated with respect on this job place, you know, job site, and that you have a system in place if that isn't happening, you know, whatever. But my experience has been, I have worked with some wonderful men, but when I've gone to them in a crunch, they didn't. They didn't. I got two responses, and they're both wrong. Like, the two responses I got was, suck it up, basically. They didn't say it like that, they said it much nicer. But basically, I'm in their locker room by being there. I work in a locker room. I don't hear locker room talk, I work in a locker room, right? So that's kind of, that's one of the things. And then I guess I lost my train of thought, but I do
What
know.
was the other wrong answer?
Oh, the other wrong answer, thank you. Write everything down. Keep track of everything.
Sure.
Keep track of everything. I go insane when I hear that. I go insane. And so they're both wrong responses. And so again, you need to come up with a way stronger push from all directions about what we're completely capable of doing, and you know, having a respectful workplace.
Kelly, what about in county?
Are people, well, it's just like anything, like, I have men I work with or whatever, and I feel pretty supported, and when I don't, I tell them. You know? And if they don't want to deal with it, they can leave, you know? So, the more entrenched older men are not as easy, but.
Yeah, you've got your hand up.
I was gonna ask, how union organizers, whether in a not yet organized shop or in a shop that already has a contract, how does one navigate the relationship with HR in regards to this? Because obviously many workers view going to HR as snitching, and also it's often ineffective. I know people who, you know, were physically assaulted, went to HR, and the next day just got switched to a different boat, and the guy that assaulted them is right back where he is, right? I mean, so I guess I'm just wondering, because the way we dealt with it in our workplace is just assuming that HR isn't actually really available to us, and then just trying to organize against the harassment, you know, in the workplace. Our coworkers catcall people, we just kind of laugh at them and go, wow, that's really stupid, yeah, that's not, yeah, screw you, man, that's not cool, you know? But is there a productive way that a union organizing committee can relate to HR in regard to this?
I actually want to take this one. I would tell any worker anywhere that anyone who defines you as a resource is not looking out for you. And HR exists exclusively to protect the company, to make sure that they're indemnable in case of legal action, and not to make your working experience comfortable or enjoyable. I would say what you and your coworkers were doing of basically shaming people who are behaving inappropriately is much more effective than going to any HR I've ever dealt with. And I'm sorry if there are any HR people in the room, you're in the wrong room. So what I would say is that's organizing, is getting your coworkers all on the same page. Whether you're union or not, you can organize, even if it's not under a sort of official banner of a union or another. If your coworkers all know that it's unacceptable to behave a certain way, that's going to be a much better solution than going to the company and hoping that they care about you, because they don't.
Yeah.
Anyone?
I would say it's the same thing. I mean, it's hard to answer a question, you know, because, I mean, if I have a blanket organizing, you know, this is how to do it, you know, wonderfully. We don't think that, you know, the room would be a lot larger and our membership would be a lot larger and, you know, my job would be a lot easier. But I don't have that. But, you know, I mean, we have definitely had some very powerful groups of workers that have been organized and have been, when something happens in the workplace, they can force management to do something about it. Because, you know, management will sweep things under the rug any chance that they can, because it's just easy. You know, harassment in any form is not an easy thing to deal with. It's not an easy thing to correct. So they'll just sweep it under the rug until they are forced to deal with it. So for us, you know, organizing to support each other, organizing to, you know, do marches on the box or petitions or, you know, work stoppages, stuff like that have been, you know, very important in actually forcing management to address an issue and to, you know, deal with a manager that is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and not then just moving them to another location so they can harass somebody else over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Up front?
So thank you for sharing all these structural issues that is going on and seeing the intersectionality between for women. And one aspect is, I want to ask is about mentorship within unions. So how do you get the right representation where leaders are purposely mentoring other workers in this position, leadership position. So slowly over time we'll represent, you know, better the workers. So that's the first solution sort of thing, or, you know, opportunity. The second one is about toxic masculinity. So when you hear about the trade of suck it up, that is something other men tell other men as well. And are women now acting like they have to act like men and have all this negativity associated with toxic masculinity in their space? And the last one I would want to sort of hear more about is kind of like tokenism. So as you mentioned, in the trade is a 20%, 30%. So they don't feel like they actually belong there. And this is reinforced with others, outsiders, does it have to be men that just say, you don't belong here? So how can people who are in this position handle this? Like, what are ways to give them that strength?
All good questions.
I'd like to answer your last one first, just because I can't remember the word. But the last one, you know, in the building and construction trades, you know, if you just have now these goals, projects with goals are on state-funded projects or on federal-funded projects. There's a lot more private construction jobs going on than that. So a lot of apartment buildings, or, you know, those are not jobs where you'll see goals for women. In the metro area, it's now at 20% for women, and in the metro area, it's about 32% for people of color. Oh gosh, I should never sit on a panel, my memory's so poor. But it's to develop diverse core crews. In construction, we travel often as crews, or we, you know, she spoke of her crew, it's the ideal crew, it's a minority crew, right? It's, you know, but if it's an established crew, and it doesn't matter which job you go on, you know, you are part of diverse work crews, then when you go on a job site where there are goals, you'll have less problem meeting those goals, right? But you won't be displacing a white man. Sometimes white men feel very threatened because they feel they are being displaced. And so that creates a whole nother set of problems that she was alluding to. And so developing diverse work crews is extremely important.
I think that ties really well into the theme of toxic masculinity that came up. Does anyone want to talk about that?
I'd love to refer people to this Harvard study on toxic workers. I think everybody should read it. And it's a very academic study, but even if you read short articles that have cited this study, you will learn a lot from it. It's a great messaging about, and you'll say, oh yeah, that's this person, this person, this person. Oh yeah, they do really good work, but gosh, they look at all the other problems they create. They're not worthwhile to keep. It's basically this study was saying. You do yourself, your company a big favor by ridding your ranks of toxic workers. Toxic workers are people who you know, have a lot of traits that are undesirable. Certainly when it comes to legal concerns that a company might have, but just in the day-to-day operations and the hour-to-hour operations, it can make life miserable for a large group of people working among them.
Anyone else on toxic masculinity? And then really quick, you mentioned union leadership, and we have two women up here who have assumed roles in leadership very recently. What would you guys say to that?
Well, one of the things that because I took office and took leadership, I've been with my local for 8 years on staff, but I took leadership a little over a year ago. And when I took office, one of our main goals was to train and teach our members and get them more involved. And so one of the things that we have and what we are working with is we have a program, it's called Organizing Beyond Barriers, and we actually bring members out to do LOAs, you know, leave of absence from the workplace, and they come and work full-time with us on, you know, a variety of different types of things, you know. Really, the surveys that we did around the Pants On campaign, we had 2 LOAers that worked on that primarily the whole time. And so they were out for 60 days. It really gets them in the mindset of organizing and in the mindset of, you know, that there's a bigger than just their individual workplace, you know. The union is larger, the community is larger, things are more important than just the day-to-day, you know, things that are going on inside. So that's what we've done as a union. We've committed to every year taking out leave of absence people to continue to train them and have them actually work on staff.
Excellent. Ellie, anything to add?
Yeah, just that in our local, we've had to be very conscious about recruiting and working with workers of color, just because, and that's taken time as a white worker and a mostly white leadership to build trust with folks. And it's a constant, it's something you just have to work on all the time. And we found that the workers of color want to fight the most because they're treated the worst. And we have to move the white workers because maybe they're not as ready. So, and I've had, you know, friends who I've worked with who've helped me push that and push myself and push our other people. But listen to the people who are treated the worst, because they're gonna they should be leading the way, and it's not gonna happen. They're not just gonna show up to your meeting and you really have to. You just have to work on that. So
Excellent. And then Kathryn.
Just just wanted to add, that goes back to what I was saying about caucuses at the IFO, is that it's really thinking outside the box and how, why do marginalized bargaining unit members not want to be involved in the union? There's a lot of reasons. There's a culture in the union that is not inclusive. And I just wanted to say, in terms of male allies, our new president, who's a white male, has really thoroughly embraced, and I'm talking majorly embraced, diversity in pursuing it, in pushing for investment in. We've got an equity caucus coordinator who's got a lot of release time, and we're looking at additional organizers, faculty who are going to be organizers for the union getting release time. And it's just really important to really, and I'm just going to say this one other thing, is really listening to people and respecting the fact that their life experience is different than yours. And that listening to what that means and what they're saying, and allowing the space for their voices to be heard, and allowing the space to really support the development of their leadership in the union is so critical. And it's such a learning process. So anyway.
Excellent. Sister up front.
And if you delve into this when I went to the bathroom, it's my bad. But this he talked a bit about how in his workplace it is more effective to have workers apply that peer pressure and workers take the lead in creating a culture where sexual harassment isn't acceptable. And I wanted to know, within your unions, has there been an approach or people thinking about an approach that focuses on picking out like social leaders in a workplace and developing them to take the lead? I suppose not just on these issues, but I guess that's the strategy for other issues. But okay, in this context, really trying to develop them to push a culture where harassment isn't acceptable.
Yeah, excellent. Developing leaders within our bargaining units. Anyone speak to that?
I haven't seen it work that effectively in my home. I think if you pay attention to the members that are engaged and help them by supporting who they believe should be in leadership positions, rather than the union itself picking out different representatives from different sectors that they want to represent. I think it would be highly effective, but the way it's done currently, it seems like they're not willing to relinquish any power and control, and that's where you get into tokenism. When if you're trying to diversify your ranks and you don't look outside and confer with the members who are engaged, who their leaders really truly are. I think you're missing the point.
Yeah, I would say that in any organizing, identifying the people that other people are already listening to,
Yes.
and working with them to affect the change you want to see. Whether you're organizing within a union or organizing a new union or just organizing on an issue is always such an important strategy, because the working class already builds cells for its own defense, and to identify the leaders in those cells is to harness that power that already exists and just needs to be awakened. So I'm so sorry, we only have time, I think, for one more, and I saw you in the back. Did you just have a question?
Yeah, so I think the part that Ellie's not telling is like the regime before her were class collaborators with the boss and were decades of leadership. And so I think what folks are really trying to do is, like, not only is now she the president of her local, but then we really have to push back against our larger union. So in our structure we have a local, and then we have a council, and then we have an international. And I think like we need to be able to, like for myself as a member and then staff for 3 years and then back to the membership, the most like blatant discrimination, and I predominantly work with teenage boys at rec centers, the most sexual harassment and gender discrimination I ever faced was 3 years as a labor organizer. And so we need to do better at calling out the toxic masculinity that runs rapid in staffing and elected leadership. And now Allie and a bunch of other folks have been elected with 3 really brilliant women, and then the president's still a guy, but we'll let him, we'll hold him accountable. But so we moved that from our local leadership. But first we had to take over our locals. Yeah. And then we moved to our council to call out just the misogyny that runs rapid there. And then my other point is what the bosses have co-opted around like identity politics. So my company, which I work for the city, but it's a company, what they have really successfully done is we have a racial equity group, we have a Saint Pride group, we have a women's group, and what they've done is they have taken predominantly, so I'm 34, like staff younger than me, who want to be in social justice movements, and these are like good Democrats, good self-righteous liberal Democrats. And what they've done is they've created these groups for us to be a part of, where they trash the working class, where they trash the unions. And so the bosses have co-opted our identity groups, and so I am just forced myself to go to every single one of these groups so that they cannot trash working class people and they cannot trash the union.
Thank you.
And so within the city, which is like this like Melvin Carter doing all this progressive stuff, we still have this class power dynamic, and God forbid any of those homeless folks have any rights at all. But so the classism and the frontline worker is still the acceptable form of blatant discrimination. But you're probably not gonna, as a, flying all of your equity flags, middle management, you're not gonna say anything blatantly racist, sexist, or homophobic, but you will trash working class people publicly, and it is still an acceptable form of discrimination. So within the union movement, I feel like all we do, Allie and I and our other comrades, is talk about Me Too and sexual harassment and misogyny within the labor movement, and historic racism. We won't leave that out. But within the organizations, what they talk about is really trying to like be the lifeboat, be the human resources group, be the affinity group for workers on this like specific identity, all while oppressing their workers. At the same time, they have every damn equity initiative I've ever heard of that is not actually about what Ali said, solving any form of racial discrimination or temp workers or people who don't have health insurance. They're not going to solve any of those problems because they don't want to pay those folks. We want to be the Walmart of the public employees. But so anyways, I guess it's like a divide between like, as a unionist, constant gender and as a queer person, sexual discrimination, and then as a city worker, class and union discrimination. And we have to be able to call out and really take over our locals, take over our councils, and get the right people. And these old guys and their naughty, disgusting ways, they need to get out of our union leadership, and we need to be running our unions. Anyway, that's my call.
Did you have any questions for the
I mean, I want to see, like, how do we call out our own, like, when our union members are bigots, when our union members are on racist nonsense, and our union members are on sexual discrimination, how do we call out our membership and not go to the company resources called HR, and not go to the bosses? Like, what, like, it's going to be really powerful what Hennepin County, like, I'm looking to Allie for leadership to say, like, how do we, as workers, call out the bigots and the bullies who have a signed union card? How do we call those folks out without going to the boss?
Alright, I think you answered that question, take over your local, unless my principal officer is watching on Facebook.
Just wait.
within the locals. I think that, you know, we need to have the right people in leadership, and we need, you know, as I said before, like, if it's harassment, if somebody has never experienced harassment, they're not gonna know that harassment is an issue to even address, right? If racism is a thing, like, I will never know what it's like to experience racism, you know, I just won't. You know, so within my leadership, I made sure that there were people that have felt that. And they will hold me accountable in that, you know. So my executive board, my leadership, my staff is all a diverse staff for that, because I might not know how that feels, but I can then go to my office next to mine and say, how, you know, what do I do here? You've experienced it, or, you know, what's your culture's take on it? So, you know, having that diversity within the unions, I think is really important. And I know it's hard, you know, in a lot of the trade stuff, it's hard to even have the diversity in the membership, let alone the leadership. But
However,
anytime
women
there
and
can
people of
be.
color show up in greater numbers than.
Yeah, and I think that
Greater
that's just important, is to have that diversity within the leadership as well, which we just haven't had for years. And I think it's something in the labor movement that is changing, and it's something that I think that will help the labor movement going forward.
All right, well, I want to thank our panel. It's so nice to have people from so many different industries up here. And I want to give everyone just a quick minute if there's any actions or asks you have with the audience that you wanted to plug. Excellent. No strikes coming up.
Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving at 3:30, there is an action at the airport for 15 and a union. That's, is it Unite Here, IAM, and the Delta Organizing Drive, and somebody else? SEIU. 3:30, Terminal 1? Terminal 1.
Terminal 1 at 3:30 at the airport the
On
day before
Wednesday.
Thanksgiving. And if you're flying out for Thanksgiving, you can kill two birds with one stone. Peter, did you have anything to plug?
Just, you know, we keep talking about how everything is connected, and I want to urge everybody who's come tonight to hear about gender harassment and what unions can and should be doing, to come back for the discussion about the labor movement and environmentalism. So December, the third Monday in December, which is the 17th. The 17th. And come, because I think it's important to see what gender perspectives have to teach us about environmental issues. And clearly part of what tonight showed us is this is all about changing the culture of our unions and the culture of our workplaces, and figuring out how we can have jobs that support the planet and aren't killing us is also part of the same set of issues. So please come back, and thank you all so very, very much
Let's hear it
for
for the
tonight.
panel.